This is DVVC's summer quarterly meeting. We are Southeastern Pennsylvania's Community Veteran Engagement Board, whose mission it is to unite veteran service organizations and advocates who share common goals to build programmatic capacity and increase services to clients under the umbrella of regional collaboration. So collaboration, this is what we're doing right now. This meeting is designed to share information about DVVC events, activities, and planning, and provide resource information to DVVC members and others working in the veteran space. As I mentioned, please add your name, your email address, name of your organization, and a link to its website to the chat box. You can save the chat box at the end of the meeting by clicking on the three buttons to the right of the space where you type your message. If you need more information on how to do this, you can ask us in the chat box. We'll also send a list of the attendees both in online and contact info if given in the chat box to everyone after the meeting. As you saw, this meeting is being recorded, and we'll put the recording and the PowerPoint slides on dvvc.org. So today we're departing from our typical subject.
Sir, you muted yourself.
I did? Wow. Okay, I'm unmuted now, right? Okay, thank you. This is especially relevant since we have the semi-quincentennial or 250th anniversary of the birth of the Navy and the Marine Corps, as well as the signing of the Declaration of Independence. As you are no doubt aware, preparations have already begun for this celebration, and I just discovered this the other day, the most notable of which locally is the rebranding of Pennsylvania as a tourist destination from Pennsylvania, Pursue Your Happiness, to Pennsylvania, the Great American Getaway. Anyway, we all know the role the military has had during the American Revolution and in our growth as a nation since, and today's quarterly meeting is designed to scratch the surface of that role in the continuing development of the United States of America. I fretted a little bit about how we should organize today's briefings, but I think what makes sense is to first focus on history and then transition into our future celebrations. So to that end, we will talk about the history of veteran advocacy, followed by a history of women in the military. Then we'll transition to discuss our newest military branch, Space Force, and end up with the semi-quincentennial of the Navy and Marine Corps in 2025 and the lead up to 2026. So our first speaker is Robert J. Kodosky, Ph.D. He's the author of The Nile Swim Club of Yeadon, A History by the History Press in 2024, Tuskegee in Philadelphia, Rising to the Challenge, History Press 2020, and Psychological Operations American Style, published by Lexington Books in 2007. He is the co-author with Brent Ruswick of the Digital Text Construction Ahead, Making American History Since 1865, published by Great River Learning in 2024. Other contributions include ones to the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia, Picturing Black History, Balloons to Drones, Air Power History Magazine, the American Intelligence Journal, the Encyclopedia of Military Science, the Journal of Military History, the Journal of Pennsylvania History, the Routledge History of Social Protest and Music, the Journal of Popular Culture, Public History News, and History Reviews of New Books and H-War. He has commented about veterans issues, the Vietnam War, and the War on Terror for C-SPAN, ABC News Radio, Sydney, Australia, PCN TV, PBS 39, 6ABC, KYW News Radio, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Washington Post, USA Today, and the documentary film Remember the 27 Crusaders. Dr. Kodosky was also on the board of the American Helicopter Museum, and as we talked before, that makes him instantly cool since pilots are cool. Next will be Claudette Williams. Claudette Williams is a leader at heart and in the field. She is known for being everywhere life can be changed and a young mind can be inspired and developed. Drawing upon her experience from her roles as a sergeant major in the United States Army, in the private and government sectors, as well as her life experience, Claudette's position in leadership has served as a stepping stone and platform building to encourage every generation. She believes that we all play a part in this world and are a part of the whole, regardless of age and where we are in life. With 30 years of service, Claudette achieved the rank of Sergeant Major and served in Desert Storm and Operations Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, and New Dawn. Williams is the creator of the first Women Veterans Museum in the state of Pennsylvania, where history is told and experiences shared through the eyes of those who served and are still serving. As the vice chair of the Pennsylvania Veterans Caucus and creator of the Women Veterans Museum, Williams believes that women have made their mark in history and that their stories must be told. Williams is continuing service by helping veterans and their families. She believes you must be ready for the tasks required when you are about service. With that in mind, Williams went on to pursue another master's in drug and alcohol addiction counseling and is currently counseling veterans in need of services and clients who are conditionally released from the county jail and are recovering. While she is proud of her many accomplishments, she highlights her most significant as the mother of 3 beautiful children. The words of a songwriter, quote, "He raised me so that I can stand on the mountain," end quote, and the biblical scripture, "To whom much is given, much is required," strengthen her passion and drive. To talk about the history of Space Force is Mr. John Lacomia of the function area manager and historian for Headquarters Space Operations Command, Peterson Space Force Base, Colorado. Mr. Lacomia attended the County College of Morris, where he received an Associate of Arts degree in Humanities, Social Science in 1993. He enlisted in the Air Force the same year and was trained as a bioenvironmental engineering technician in the 305th Air Mobility Wing. In June of 1996, he was selected for Palace Chase into the New Jersey Air National Guard, where he transferred to the 108th Air Refueling Wing at McGuire Air Force Base and continues to serve as a bioenvironmental engineering technician for the 108th Medical Group until 2000. During this period of time, he completed the non-commissioned officer prep course and also attended Ramapo College of New Jersey and earned a Bachelor of Arts in History in 1998. From September 99 until June 2004, Mr. Lacomia taught history in the New Jersey public school system. He's been wing historian for numerous Air Force units and expeditionary operations and received a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies at Ramapo College of New Jersey in 2005. In October 2018, Mr. Lacomia returned to Air Force Space Command and later United States Space Force Space Operations Command, which he'll talk about as a functional area manager and historian. And finally, we have George S. Leone to talk about the semi-quincentennial of the Navy and Marine Corps in 2025. Mr. Leone is the president and chair of Homecoming 250 Navy Marine Corps, the charity coordinating the Navy and Marine Corps 250th celebration. He previously served as a judge in the New Jersey Superior Court in Camden and in the Appellate Division. Earlier, he was an assistant United States attorney in Camden and chief of the Appeals Division for the United States Attorney's Office for the District of New Jersey. He received from the Attorney General of the United States the Director's Award for helping to defend New Jersey's Megan's Law and the John Marshall Award for helping to lower crack cocaine sentences. He previously served as a Philadelphia Assistant District Attorney, an associate at the Deckard Law Firm in Philadelphia, and a law clerk for Judge and World War II Marine James Hunter III of the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit in Camden. He is the son of a World War II Navy veteran, is a lifetime student of military history, grew up in South Jersey, graduated from Harvard College and the University of Chicago Law School, and lives in Haddonfield. So we're going to go through the speakers. We'll have a short question and answer period after each speaker before we on to the next speaker. And depending on the time remaining at the end of the talk, we can open the floor to general questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to keep track of them and have the speaker answer them. We may also save some questions for after all the presenters have spoken. So without further ado, Dr. Kodosky, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm honored to be here. Thanks, Nancy and Tammy, for the invitation and for all the help. And I have to say about that introduction, I'm glad you left it out. I don't know how cool it is, but if you Google my name and put KGB after it, you'll find numerous references to me as a retired major general in the KGB. And they're academic references, they're in books. I was doing something around intelligence in Iraq, and in a conversation with Oleg Kalugin, who is former KGB and in this country because Putin, of course, wants him dead, and someone confused me with him, and someone else picked up the footnote, and someone else picked up the footnote, and you should really do something about it, but I tell students it makes me the most dangerous professor on campus, so I leave it alone. Anyway, thanks for having me. I'm Bob Kodosky. I teach at Westchester University, military and diplomatic history, and I also advise our student veteran group on campus. You can click to the next slide. So this is a piece that I wrote in the Encyclopedia Greater Philadelphia about veterans and veteran organizations. that complements what I'm going to talk about today, and you can use it as a reference. And that textbook that you mentioned, one of the things that I wanted to do in that digital text was write a chapter about American history through veterans and veteran organizations. This is out there if you want to take a look. And the thing about Philadelphia in American history, we're talking about the 250th. I'm not even going to try and say that word, but Philadelphia has really been central to much of the history around veterans and veteran advocacy. You can click to the next slide. So you had mentioned these books. The Tuskegee Airmen and Philadelphia have a unique kind of connection to one another. And that project led to this project about the Nile Swim Club. And I have this slide here because in talking about the history of veterans and veteran organizations, I think it's important up front to note that in the history of this country from the very beginning, African Americans have participated in conflicts all the way through. And quite often the promise was the recognition after the conflict as equal citizens. And of course, much of the time after those conflicts, what the result was to belittle and in many cases diminish or even deny that African Americans had served in the military. That photograph is myself with a couple of original Tuskegee members that are still with us. That's at the Union Leg. And they had to fight for their right to fight for this country in a war against racism and fascism. And then their struggle continued after the war, and that's what the book with the swim club has to do with. I mean, you had World War II veterans of color who came back, and their children and themselves could not swim in the local swim club. So I just wanted to sort of call attention to that up front as we're talking about veteran advocacy and the importance of advocacy to addressing veterans' issues. You can go to the next slide. So pictured there is a guy by the name of Cincinnatus. And Cincinnatus in ancient Rome gained acclaim when the barbarians were at the gate. He set down his plowshare, picked up his sword, led an army for 16 days, was successful, came back, put down the sword, picked up the plowshare, and wasn't interested in any kind of honor or glory. And that idea was something that Americans early picked up. Some of you are probably aware of the General Society of the Cincinnati, which held its first meeting at the City Tavern on South 2nd Street with George Washington presiding on October the 13th, 1783. And Washington served as the president until 1799, when Alexander Hamilton took over. The big thing about the Society of Cincinnati and the veterans organizations that followed it for almost 100 years is that they were fraternal, they included officers only, and weren't really interested in advocating for veterans' issues. They were sort of clubs, so to speak, that were both fraternal and hereditary, but not ones that advocated, and also ones that weren't inclusive. You can go to the next slide. In terms of everybody else, the idea that, because one of the things that the Society of Cincinnati did advocate for was payment for officers, but everyone else was sort of left on their own. And there was this idea that you fought in the conflict and you should just go home. I have, during the American Revolution, some of you are probably aware of these things in Philadelphia, It was a militia attack on Fort Wilson, as it was called, James Wilson's house on October 4th, 1779. As soon as the British got out, the militia went after the merchants because the merchants had stayed behind and made money while the militia wasn't getting paid. A couple of years later, the PA Line Mutiny in 1781. Lack of pay, 2,500 soldiers mutinied, and it was basically negotiated to come to an end. But then in 1783, on June 20th, Continental Army veterans from Lancaster and Philadelphia threatened the capital, which was in Philadelphia, to demand promised pay. And there was a plea to the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania did not intervene. Ultimately, the mutineers were dispersed by 1,500 soldiers commanded by Generals William Heath and Robert Howe under orders of George Washington. This had the capital leave Philadelphia for New York, and they ended up coming back to Philadelphia because of another veteran revolt up in Massachusetts. You've heard of the Shays Rebellion, which precipitated the Constitutional Convention. So this idea that veterans just go home, and in the case of the Revolutionary War, pensions were awarded indigent veterans in 1818, all Continental Army veterans who had to prove that they had 2 years of service for a full pension was awarded in 1832. This was obviously much later after the war ended. I will note that one person who did get a pension, the first woman, Margaret Corbin, was a Pennsylvania native who was wounded at Fort Washington in New York. And she was the first woman, as I said, to get a pension in the United States. You can turn the slide. African Americans participated in the Revolutionary War. You see a couple of quotes there. In some cases, African Americans who were promised freedom returned to slavery after the war. The pattern of African Americans continued, this idea of being kept in a proper place. So, for example, after the First World War, a war that the United States entered ostensibly to promote democracy throughout the world, it was common practice in the United States for Blacks who showed up at Veterans Day parades to be lynched. There were a number of incidents of that occurring in the 1920s. And of course, even after the Second World War, not only GI Bill inequities, but going through the documents, as much as we celebrate the Tuskegee Airmen today, the initial reaction of the military was very much to downgrade their accomplishments. You can go to the next slide. So, Society of Cincinnati, fraternal organization for white officers. The pattern continues. Here's the Society of the War of 1812. President of this was Joel Barlow Sutherland, who founded Jefferson Medical College. This is at 6th and Chestnut in Philadelphia, the photograph. For veterans of the War of 1812, they received their pensions in 1871. If you do the math on that, not a lot received pensions. During this time, I do also want to mention that in Philadelphia, the first national home for veterans was created in 1826. The United States Navy acquired 20.7 acres at Grays Ferry Avenue from prominent Philadelphia Quaker Timothy Abbott, and that stayed there. The U.S. Naval Asylum, which was renamed as the U.S. Naval Home in 1889, housed retired sailors until it was replaced by a new facility in Mississippi in 1976. You can click to the next slide. Another fraternal organization, this one created after America's war against Mexico, the Aztec Club. This is a photograph from 13th and Locust, General Robert Patterson's mansion in Philadelphia. And this location is now the spot where the Pennsylvania Historical Society is located. Click to the next one. What really started to change things was the American Civil War. Because of the size of the armies and the number of veterans that were left and the disillusionment that was expressed, So the parade in Washington, D.C., 2 days, 200,000 soldiers, the banner, the only national debt we can never pay is the debt we owe the victorious Union soldiers. But at the same time, you have guys like George Bliss, a Union Army veteran, who said, when peace came and our services were no longer necessary, we found not only the offices were filled by those who remained at home, but also that an old soldier was looked upon with some suspicion. And the evidence bears that out. In 1877, there was a homeless crisis for veterans, something called the soldier's disease. There were estimated 45,000 veterans addicted to opiates by 1879. And you have quotes like this one from William M. Sloan: veteran pensions constitute socialism. Veterans should be content with the honor and give no thought to money or government-funded benefits. So, there is this idea in the United States that historically the nation has responded without being prompted by anyone to take care of veterans and veteran issues. And maybe the one exception to that is the Vietnam War era. Actually, we're talking about it being the rule, not the exception. You can go to the next slide. What starts to change things is the MULIS is the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States. Loyal is missing in that, the Loyal Legion. George Cadwalder is there. This was created after Lincoln's assassination. It was another fraternal organization in the model of the Cincinnati, but it sort of serves as a bridge to organizations that'll follow. It began to advocate on behalf of the general welfare of the Union, its soldiers and their widows. And it began to sort of create a path for what followed. You can go to the next slide. And that's the Grand Army of the Republic, the first real organization in the United States that had as its mission to advocate for veterans. It was created in 1866 by Dr. Benjamin F. Stevenson in Decatur, Illinois. Consisted of 400,000 members at its peak, open to all, including African Americans. It's one of the first racially inclusive organizations in the United States. Now, posts were segregated. Nevertheless, it, as an organization, was integrated. And Philadelphia is currently the home to the Grand Army of the Republic Civil War Museum, which is located in the Lewis Pattison House on Frankfurt Avenue. The Grand Army of the Republic is the organization that is really responsible for initiating Memorial Day in the United States, and really served as kind of the watchdog of Memorial Day for decades. And Memorial Day, of course, in our own time, it polls Americans confuse it with Veterans Day. Many don't know what the day is for, but the Grand Army of the Republic really sort of served to try and keep the day solemn and one for remembering the ones that fell during the American Civil War. You can go to the next slide. And these are a couple of Civil War veterans that, of course, women who also received pensions, and the Grand Army of the Republic advocated, again, for women to receive pensions as well. You can go to the next slide. So something, this seemed to be, oh no, I'm sorry. So the Grand Army of the Republic inspired many of these organizations that we've come to know as ones that advocate: the VFW in 1899, the American Legion in 1919, the VVA in 1978, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America in 2004, advocacy on a number of issues, and also engagement. The American Legion held the first American Legion World Series in Philadelphia in 1926. You can continue. So this is a good example of advocacy. If you're not aware of the bonus march that took place on Washington in 1931, veterans of the First World War were promised a bonus based on the amount of time that they had deployed. A Philadelphian by the name of John L. Ferry, on December 14th, 1931, led a veterans bonus brigade of 50 veterans on a 4-day protest march from Philadelphia to Washington to call on an early payment of the bonus promised by Congress. It inspired a much larger march in the summer of 1932. And as you know, this all ended in not only the veterans not receiving that bonus, but also a violent disbursement of the veterans that was called for by President Herbert Hoover and executed by the American Army at that time. What it did lead to also, though, was the American Legion and the VFW lobbying to create the 1944 Servicemen Readjustment Act, or the GI Bill of Rights. You can go to the next slide. And we've talked about, and this is a good example of being pushed back into place after the war for African-American veterans and lynching, and this idea that African-Americans, a short step to the conclusion, the political rights must be respected. You can go to the next slide. And you can go to the next slide. This is... Yeah, and you can go to the next slide. This is, I'm sorry about this a little bit longer of the, and you can go to the next slide. And the next slide. And so I'm not quite sure in terms of the presentation. I must have sent along a longer one, but let me just conclude here because I don't want to take more time. In the post 9/11 generation, less than 1% of the total population serves. And that disconnect between the American population and the amount of military veterans creates issues. And so the importance of veterans advocating and veteran engagement historically has certainly been the case, but it's probably more needed than ever as society generally simplifies veteran issues and has continuing kind of very romantic ideas about warfare. Thank you.
Dr. Kodosky, thank you so much. That was super informative. I love it when we go through these presentations and I learn something new. Is there a quick answer as to why there was a shift in veterans are fine if they've served their country, that's all they need, to this, let's take care of them? Is there a short answer to that question?
Yes, because of the size of the Army during the Civil War. I mean, you had a much larger group of veterans, and this, and I think also a connection because the war was fought with so many people around so many areas that were populated. So there was a greater awareness, I think.
Got it. That makes sense. And I've seen Grand Army of the Republic placards all over the place, but I just recently around Memorial Day kind of got smarter on it. And yeah, they were kind of the proto veteran service organization. And I think my understanding is it started out as a way to honor the fallen of the Civil War, specifically from the Union Army. But there were also Confederate Army organizations that popped up as well, which brings up the whole resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan and things like that. But
yeah, and the other, just very quickly, the other important thing is the Civil War is the first time that you have soldiers I mean, the military sent out orders to bury soldiers and mark their graves, and you had the creation of the national cemetery system. So, it's in earlier wars, the idea was to just bury people often in mass graves where they fell.
Got
But
it.
it was a park cemetery movement that sort of coincided with the war. And again, the amount of dead, you have the creation of places like Arlington Cemetery, for example.
Got it. Well, thank you. And we can continue to, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. So thank you, Dr. Kodosky. Claudette, you're up. I saw Claudette. I see she's still. Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. Claudette, are you with us?
I am.
Okay.
I'm as busy as Grand Central. I swear. My phone doesn't stop ringing. Good morning, everyone.
Okay. Go ahead. I was going to say, if you want to be later in the presentation, we can do that if you want to shift. Are you happy with where you are?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. All right, it's yours.
Please.
Sorry.
That would be.
Claudette, your audio is very spotty. Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
All right. Your audio is super spotty.
Yeah, if you can leave me for a little bit later, that would be good.
Okay.
Let me get out of this area.
Okay. John, can you adapt and take over? John Lacomia, are you with us? All right. In the interest of speed, George, do you want to talk about the semi-quincentennial?
Sure, I'm happy to. It's again, it's an honor to be here, and we have been happy to have the endorsement of the DVVC for some time, and we took that endorsement and others, including an endorsement by all 14 living secretaries of the Navy, and convinced the Secretary of the Navy to bring the Navy and Marine Corps celebration here. So I'll be happy to go through my PowerPoint. If you could put that up, that would be great. But all right, so I'm the head of Homecoming 250 Navy Marine Corps, which is a volunteer organization that was organized to bring the Navy and Marine Corps celebration for their 250th birthdays to their birthplace, which is Philadelphia and the Delaware River. And so with the Navy and the Marine Corps, we will be hosting the Navy and Marine Corps 250th celebration. It is the main celebration is October 9th through the 16th of 2025. And then we will have special events on the birthday of the Marine Corps on November 10th, 2025. And so let me go through if you can go to the next slide, please. So the idea is to bring these services home. Both were founded here and created here out of whole cloth. And this was indeed a Navy and Marine Corps town for over 200 years. And the idea is to reunite the services with the city that gave them birth. Next, please. So just a little history. The Navy was created here in Philadelphia on October 13th, 1775. And you'll note that's before the Declaration of Independence, but after the outbreak of conflict in Massachusetts. And so the Second Continental Congress, sitting in Independence Hall, decided that they should form a Navy, which is a tremendous achievement for a group of civilians who have no major military experience in a nation which has no ships, no military ships. So on October 13th, they resolved to create a Navy. They first purchased vessels that already existed and converted them to warships. And this picture here shows the first American ship, the Alfred, having the first American flag, the Grand Union flag, being raised by one of the first officers commissioned in Philadelphia, a young Scotsman's Lieutenant John Paul Jones. And you'll notice in the picture that behind the ship is Christ Church steeple, which still obviously exists. Next, please. And then after it took them a few weeks, but the Continental Congress realized that if they were going to have a Navy, they had to have Marines to put on those ships. And so the Continental Congress on November the 10th in Independence Hall ordered that they raise a couple of battalions of Marines, and the Marines did their first recruiting drive, traditionally in Tun Tavern, a very old colonial tavern. This is a great 1920s view of what that might have looked like. I'm sure it was far less glamorous than this, but they're in their green uniforms. And interestingly, for the bicentennial, when they do the same scene, it looks like a bunch of ragamuffins with no uniforms at all, but which is probably more accurate, but not as picturesque. But so the Marine Corps was created November the 10th, and they regard Tun Tavern as their birthplace. Next, please. Nope, go back one if you don't mind. So, we've gone up there. There we go. So, as I said, this area remained the center of the Navy for many years and was a Navy town for many years. And one of the reasons why is that became a center of Navy shipbuilding. And in fact, the first U.S. naval shipyard was and still is in Philadelphia. The original site of it, if you look on the picture of the right of the building of the frigate Philadelphia, was right next to Old Swedes Church in Philadelphia. And then after the Civil War, it was moved down to League Island, which is the current Navy Yard. And on the right, you see the launching of the battleship New Jersey, which was recently in the same dry dock where it was fitted out. So that tradition continued in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania and New Jersey for hundreds of years. And there were great shipbuilders, not only the naval shipyard, but also commercial shipbuilders that built military vessels. There were several on the Philadelphia side. There were some down in Chester and in Delaware. Perhaps the largest ultimately was the ill-named New York Shipbuilding Company, which was located in Camden, New Jersey, and built tremendous numbers of ships in World War I and World War II. Next, please. And in addition to ships, this area provided innumerable heroes for the early Navy and Marines, and that continued on to this day. This is just a small sampling of one of them, Commodore Barry. Everyone's familiar because he's got a bridge named after him, but he was a heroic officer in the Revolutionary War and then served as the first officer of the U.S. Navy. And on the right, you have one of the most greatest heroes of the Navy's history, Stephen Decatur, who is from the area and whose grave at St. Peter's Church is the most magnificent grave in the Old City. And in the center, you have two contributions from New Jersey. Medal of Honor winner John Basilone, who won the Medal of Honor on Guadalcanal, was brought home and insisted on returning to the Marine Corps, and then died at, I believe, Iwo Jima or Okinawa. I'm forgetting which one. And then Admiral Halsey, also from New Jersey, who was one of the two great fighting admirals of the Navy in World War II. Next, please. So we went to the Secretary of the Navy. As I said, we got the endorsement of the DVVC. We got the endorsement of numerous other organizations, such as the Navy League. We got the endorsement of every congressman, senator, governor, state legislature, and the mayors of the two cities in the tri-state area. And with that and all 14 living secretaries of the Navy, we took those endorsements to the newly appointed Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, who decided that the Navy and the Marine Corps should celebrate their 250th birthdays in Philadelphia and Camden in 2025. This is a bi-state celebration. It covers the entire Delaware Valley. Here you see him speaking at our gala last year, when he ordered the first ever Navy-Marine Corps combined week, which was a small affair mainly designed to open up the lines of communication again to Philadelphia between the Navy and the Marine Corps, which had atrophied after the closure of the Navy base. Next, please. So we have trying to give the Navy and Marine Corps a spectacular 250th birthday celebration, and that celebration will begin in the summer of 2025, when we will have museum exhibits on 250 years of Navy and Marine Corps history. Those exhibits will continue on until the beginning of the next year, and that's through the courtesy of several local museums that are either planning exhibits on their own or have offered up their space to have exhibits for free. And so, for example, you've got the Independent Seaport Museum will have its exhibit on the founding of the Navy and Marine Corps in Philadelphia. The American Swedish Historical Museum will have an exhibit on the history of naval shipbuilding from the USS Monitor in the Civil War, which they already celebrate because it was made by a Swede, up until the present day. And then the Library Company is doing a documentary exhibit. The African American Museum is doing a photographic exhibit of the roles of African Americans in the Navy and Marine Corps. The Battleship New Jersey will have several issues, and we may have a painting exhibit at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts showing these paintings, which are always in Philadelphia, including the one in the left. I'm not sure I can get it moved from where it is, but that's at the Museum of Art and is the only painting I'm aware of of an event in American history done by a great master, so-called, which is Edouard Manet's painting of the battle between the USS Kearsarge and the Alabama, Confederate ship Alabama, which occurred off the coast of France. Next, please. So one of the other things we used to get the Secretary of the Navy, who is a New Yorker, to commit the Navy and Marine Corps to celebrate their birthdays in Philadelphia, is the tremendous fact that we have the buildings where the Navy and Marine Corps were actually created. So the centerpiece of this festivities is going to be Independence National Historical Park. We've got here Independence Hall, where the Continental Navy and Continental Marines were created. A little known fact is that the Navy and Marine Corps went out of business after the Revolutionary War. The Continental Congress decided that they couldn't afford them and didn't need them anymore. The Barbary pirates and the French convinced the new government under the Constitution that they did need them, and they found the money in Congress Hall next to Independence Hall. That's the birthplace of the U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps. And to recognize Commodore Barry's role as the first officer picked for the new U.S. Navy and the first flag officer of the U.S. Navy, his statue stands behind Independence Hall. Next, please. So we have a number of events that are going to take advantage of the tremendous historical assets of the city and use Independence Hall and really Independence Mall as their centerpiece. And the first one will be the celebration of the Navy's 250th birthday on October 13, 2025. That will be a celebration we are positive will be headlined by the Secretary of the Navy, but it will be quite likely that it will be that the Secretary of Defense and or the President of the United States will be present. And we are also going to have a similar celebration on Independence Mall for the Marine Corps' 250th birthday. But the event I think that you are going to be most interested in everything that we're doing is that we're planning to fill Independence Mall with 20 to 30,000 veterans and surround them with veteran service organizations, either by closing 5th and 6th Streets and putting the veteran services organizations there, or by putting them in Independence Square behind Independence Mall or Washington Square next to that Independence Square. And really, that's designed for a number of purposes. We're going to want to celebrate veterans of all services, not just the Navy and the Marine Corps. And we want to give them access to veteran service organizations to help them get the services they need. And we want to give the veteran service organizations a chance to increase their membership, which, as all of you know, is a difficult problem now for veterans organizations because we're not so much of a organization joining country as we used to be. So that's going to be a great event. That's going to be a picnic. We are looking to get a sponsor to help us feed all those veterans. That will be one of the major events on the weekend that precedes the Navy's birthday on October the 13th. We know from experience from last year that the Navy Band and the Marine Band will come here and perform, as will the silent drill team. We are also hoping to get the headline organizations for the Navy and Marine Corps, particularly the Navy Band, and most particularly the President's own Marine Band, which was founded in Philadelphia when this was the capital of the United States. We also hope to get the Drum and Bugle Corps, the Commandant's own, And we're hoping, in addition to the individual concert that those organizations will do in Independence Mall and elsewhere, that we can combine them with the Philadelphia Orchestra, hopefully in an outdoor concert on Independence Mall, and hopefully a televised concert, which we would think would be a version of the Capitol Fourth concert that happens in Washington, and a real show-stopping event for this celebration, perhaps accompanied by singers that people are familiar with. In conjunction with probably the Veterans Reunion, we're hoping to have a salute to service parade where we have young people who are in or about to join the military. So the midshipmen from the Naval Academy, NROTC and ROTC members, students at the schools that are preparing them for military service, to show, because one of the purposes of this event is to reconnect this area with the military. With the closure of the bases, as it was pointed out, very few people serve in the military compared to the general population, about approximately 1%. And in this area in particular, where there's few bases, very few people know anyone in the military anymore. And another purpose of this is to remind our youth in what is, unfortunately, the poorest major city in the United States, and next to it, one of the poorest cities, period, in the United States, to remind the youth of our area of their opportunity to serve their country if they want to take that opportunity and change their lives. And so the Salute Service Parade is designed to do that. And we hope that with the concert, particularly if it's the outdoor concert, we will culminate that with a fireworks and drone show. Next, please. But the big attraction, one back, please. The big attraction here, which I think will get the attention of everybody, including our youth, is the military assets that the military is bringing. And the Secretary of the Navy has committed the Blue Angels. They will come here. They will not only overfly the waterfront where the ships will be, and over Independence Mall where the celebrations will be on the Navy's birthday, but they will overfly all the region, the entire region, I think from Valley Forge to Moorestown, and perhaps down to Wilmington, and show off their tremendous formation flying skills. Next slide, please. And we hope then to be joined to let the Marines show off by having their jets do what only Marines jets can do, which is to take off straight up and down. There's several sites in the area we can use for that demonstration. Next, please. And we hope to join these elite units with other Navy and Marine Corps aircraft, basically representing all the aircraft in the fleet if we can. And in the Marine Corps aviation fleet, we are on our own expense trying to invite heritage aircraft like the propeller-driven World War II aircraft here to join the Navy and Marine Corps aircraft so that people get a sense of the history of the aviation wing of the services. We are planning to have demonstrations by the Navy SEALs and also by the Leapfrog parachute team. I went out to San Diego, met with them, and they have threatened to strap me to one of them and throw me out of an airplane as a reward for doing all this. We'll see if my wife approves of that. Next slide, please. Another thing we've gotten the Secretary of the Navy to do is to commit at least 5 Navy ships to come up the Delaware and show the Navy's tremendous accomplishments, including ships that are important to the Marine Corps. So at the present time, and you'll hear in a second, I'm asking for more ships, but we have gotten one of our great reach ships, which is to get a WASP-class amphibious assault ship. It looks like it will in fact be the Kearsarge. And that's essentially a World War II aircraft carrier for Marines. It's got Marines jets on it, and there are tilt wing and helicopter assets, as well as a landing dock for its amphibious vessels. We are going to get a Arleigh Burke-class destroyer that you see depicted there. And those 2 ships will likely be at the Navy Yard. And then we will get 2 littoral combat ships and a Spearhead class expeditionary fast transport, a catamaran that can carry tanks at 45 miles an hour through the ocean. Those ships will be split between Penn's Landing and the Camden waterfront. Next slide, please. On my wish list for the Navy are several other ships, one of which I might actually get. I hope I get more, but which is a San Antonio class amphibious transport dock. The San Antonio is the principal amphibious vessel of the Navy used by the Marines, and it has the virtue that it can really demonstrate some of the things the Marines can do, including showing people what hovercrafts, which I imagine most of us, including myself, have never seen, and amphibious landing vessels, as well as using its aviation deck to demonstrate things that it can do. That may be coming either in October or for the Marine Corps birthday in November. I'm hoping to get a cruiser as well. As many of you recognize that silhouette from the cruiser in the cornfield up near Moorestown. That ship was essentially its crucial component. Crucial component radar was developed right here. And I'm also hoping to get a Virginia-class attack submarine, preferably the Delaware or the New Jersey. This area, as it turns out, is crucial to the manufacture of 20% of the components that go into all submarines. And there's a big effort, as you know, to promote the building of submarines because they are one of the better avenues we have to deter and fight war against China. And would love to have one come up to Camden or Philadelphia. We're not sure that's going to be possible, but if we can get one, we know they can take one at least as far as Wilmington, and we're hoping to get one there to demonstrate the submarine, the link of this ship to this area to the submarine force. Next, please. One of the things we also used to convince the Secretary of the Navy was the fact that we could do something here that no place else could do. That we could assemble here a ship from every major war in which the Navy and the Marine Corps have defended the United States. And only we can do that because we have the Olympia, the sole surviving ship of the Spanish-American War, and we can do it more easily than anyone else because we have the New Jersey. Next, please. The Olympia was the most famous ship of the Spanish-American War. It also served with one of the two vessels left that served in World War I. And it had the great honor of returning the unknown soldier from France to Arlington after World War I. And that has a tremendous tie to the Marine Corps because the only reason that casket got across the ocean, which they decided, I guess for ceremonial reasons, to put on the deck of the ship, was that the Marine Honor Guard chained themselves to the casket and the ship to prevent the casket from floating away in a North Atlantic gale. Next, please. And on the other side of the river, we have the battleship New Jersey, which was the only battleship to serve in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War in the Middle East. It has a tremendous history of supporting, not only of having a large Marine detachment, but of supporting the Marines, particularly in Beirut, in Vietnam, and the Second World War, every landing in 1944 and 45 in the Pacific. It's also the most decorated ship afloat and the most decorated battleship in Navy history. Next, please. And to represent the undersea Navy, whether we get a real active duty submarine or not, we have the submarine Bakuna, which, like the Olympia, is part of the Independence Seaport Museum and served in World War II and the Cold War. Next, please. So we're trying to get historical ships to fill in the period before 1898. And one we have definitively gotten is the tall ship Providence, which was a replica created during the bicentennial of the ship Providence that was at one point commanded by John Paul Jones and also escorted on the Marines and the Navy when they launched their first missions, which were launched from Philadelphia, which went down to the Bahamas to seize gunpowder and cannon. Next, please. And to round out representing all the conflicts, we're still striving to get two other vessels. From the War of 1812, we hope to get the brig Niagara, which helped win the Battle of Lake Erie, is stationed in Erie, Pennsylvania, as the Pennsylvania state flagship and has visited Philadelphia in the past, but not for a long time. And we're hoping to sail her here. It just depends on whether her refit gets done in time. And we are also working to build a replica of the most famous and revolutionary ship of the Civil War, the USS Monitor, which has the great virtue of being the simplest looking naval vessel ever created. It was called the cheese box on a raft. And we were originally going to build a permanent one to be a tourist attraction in Philadelphia, but we fell off the schedule at Philadelphia shipyard. So we are probably going to try to get a barge and to make it look like the Monitor, but it won't last very long. But it will still be a tremendous sign of the immense progress that the Navy has made over the years. Next, please. For the Marines, the Marines are by far, I've learned in this, and if there's anyone who disagrees with this on the call, you can let me know. They are the most traditional of the military services, and they care more about their birthday than anyone else. And partly that's due to the efforts of Commandant Lejeune in the 1920s. And in the 1920s, he decided that they should not date themselves back to the 1798 founding of the U.S. Marines in Philadelphia, but back to the 1775 founding of the Continental Marines in Philadelphia, and that they should celebrate their birthday with a ball, and that first ball had to be in Philadelphia. So on November 10th, 1925, there was a tremendously successful ball, and we are going to host the 100th Marine Corps Ball, next slide, in the same ballroom where General Lejeune held the first Marine Corps birthday ball in 1925. That's the Bellevue Stratford then and the Bellevue now, and it looks exactly the same. Next slide, please. Now, we decided to hold that ball on November 10th, both because that's the Marine Corps, for three reasons. Because that's the Marine Corps 250th birthday, because it's the 100th anniversary of the first ball, and because we would like that to be the culminating event of something that you've probably already heard about in the media, which is the effort to recreate Tun Tavern. We were originally going to do this ourselves. We ran into an organization that was already trying to do it. We partnered with them. And the plan is that we're going to be doing the celebrations, but the plan is to rebuild Tun Tavern as close as possible to its original location, which is located under the southbound lanes of I-95. Tun Tavern was created almost as soon as Philadelphia was founded, because taverns were where you did business in the colonial era. This is where the first immigrant societies in the United States were created. It's where where Freemasonry in the United States was created. It's where Benjamin Franklin recruited for what would ultimately be the Pennsylvania National Guard. It's where John Adams wrote the Articles of War for the Navy. It's where George Washington had his farewell dinner before he went to command the Continental Army. For all you Army folks, at least I can give you that nod. And obviously, it's where the Marines did their first recruiting drive. And we plan to celebrate this. Next slide. Celebrate the recreation of Tun Tavern. It's the Tun Tavern Legacy Foundation has acquired land as close as possible to the original site, which is near 2nd and Market Streets on 2nd. It is going to be built. The front piece of it will be look like the original tavern. And then behind it will be a restaurant. So in order to be large enough to keep itself afloat, because that's not a very big tavern. And the plan is going to be owned by a charity and will be a lasting gathering place for Marines and others. And frankly, from what I've learned in this process, it will be a tourist mecca for the city of Philadelphia. It will draw Marines from all over the area, as well as Masons and others, and it will serve a similar purpose to City Tavern, except that it will be not quite as fancy, because it wasn't as fancy. It was a waterfront tavern, and it will really give an opportunity for the Navy, for this city to celebrate the Marine Corps' birthplace, and for Marines to celebrate every significant event in their lives, basically, because I think Marines will do that. Took us a long time to find the land. It obviously takes a while to build a building in the city of Philadelphia. The hope is that the shell of that historical building will be complete by November 10th, 2025, and will be dedicated on that day just shortly before the ball. Next slide, please. So there's some other events I can go over quickly. There's an academic symposium that will be hosted by Penn and Rutgers. There will be a leadership summit with all the military, civilian military, and political leaders and corporate leaders that will be here. There will be we're hoping there will be a maritime exposition in the convention center, essentially a large trade show that not only will give an opportunity to build the industrial base in this area and to get business for businesses in the area, but also as a showpiece for the students, for people, potential recruits, and also for the next item, which is the maritime workforce outreach. The Navy is very interested in building, getting workers for the maritime trades to build both civilian and military vessels. And so they are working very hard to do that, and we are helping them and hoping to recruit people for those trades. We also plan to have athletic events. We're going to work on the NFL to have them schedule Eagles home games at which they celebrate the Navy and Marine Corps 250th. We hope to have a Navy Temple game take place during the October celebration. We're going to have a 10K and other athletic events, and we are arranging historic tours of the many sites, particularly in Old City and Society Hill, but in all of Philadelphia that are important to the Navy, including the Naval Asylum that was mentioned earlier, which was the precursor to the Naval Academy. Next slide, please. So we hope that all of you are interested in this. I see some nice things going up in the chat, which I haven't had time to read. We would greatly welcome your support, but I really want to return to the thing that I think will most interest you. We want the All Veterans Reunion. We want to surround them, as I said, with veteran service organizations. We would love to have an organization coordinate the veteran services organizations and to get the word out to them so that they can have booths or however it's organized to provide services to veterans, and for heritage veterans organizations and veterans organizations like the VFW and so forth, which have already endorsed us, to help them get members, because for those organizations to survive, they need to get youthful members. And so that's one way I really love to have the DVVC involved. Obviously, I'd love to get the word out to your members about this, and I'll be happy to share. I see things in the chat of asking if there's things that we can share. I'd be happy to share things. And in fact, I believe the DVCC leaders who are on this call are going to share. We gave them our printed materials that can be our brochure and our visual overview and our one-page description of this, which I hope they will share with everyone in the DVVC after this call. And obviously, one thing we really love to have is people come to this celebration. If we're filling Independence Mall with veterans, we'd like everyone who's on this call to help drum up people for that event. So to come to that event, we'll feed them and they'll get to visit all the VSOs. So please help us with that. And again, if there's anyone who knows that their employer or other people that they know might want to support this, might want to volunteer, I would greatly appreciate that. And I'll look quickly at the chat and answer any questions that anybody has.
George, thank you so much. I think you've got some really exciting stuff happening, and the big event on Constitution Mall, I think, will be pretty amazing. In the interest of time, we'll skip over questions for you right now. Claudette, are you in a place where you can brief? Claudette,
Give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay, let's do this. John, can you talk about Space Force?
Absolutely.
Claudette, are you okay with that?
I am good.
Okay, cool. John, floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. When you're ready to pull my slides up, that'd be great. So my name is John Lacomia. I'm a veteran of the Air Force, Air National Guard, and Air Force Reserve. Worked with my friend Tammy there for a number of years, and over the years, I got myself into being a historian full-time for Air Force Space Command, and then now the United States Space Force. And been a pretty exciting time. We've done a lot of research on what it was like when the Air Force broke away from the Army, which I know everybody's familiar with. And what we found is not a lot of information came out with regard to some the struggles that the Air Force had when they broke away from the Army. So what we've tried to do is try to make sure that we chronicle a lot of historical events and milestones to make sure that the next service that is actually created has some information, at their fingertips about the growing pains, I should say, that any new service is going to have. So a lot of the events have happened in the creation of the Space Force, and what I'll try to do is just highlight a few of them, some of the huge milestones, and be here to answer any questions. So, as I mentioned, I'm not only a Space Force historian, I also do Air Force historian work, and I work currently for Headquarters Space Operations Command, which was previously Air Force Space Command. So you can go on to the next slide, please. So just to highlight, a few things, what I'll talk about, the 1950 space race and launch of Sputnik 1, the United States military space programs, establishment of Space Command, which later became Air Force Space Command, the discussions to create the Space Force, and the establishment of the Space Force in 2019. Slide, please. So to give it a little bit of beginning on space, United States space history, post World War II, actually right around the time that World War II ends, General Hap Arnold, who's the commander of the United States Army Air Forces, tasked General Bernard Schriever to integrate and liaise with the scientific community to advance critical technologies that could be instrumental to the Air Force in potentially next global conflict, and one of which was to commission the RAND study. And the idea was, hey, we're going to need to be prepared for a war that or a conflict that may involve space assets. So the Department of Defense in the 1950s focused on developing space capabilities to support national military objectives like weather, surveillance, reconnaissance, communications, and navigation. And while the United States is developing their technology in the 1950s, the Soviet Union, who we were in a Cold War and an undeclared space race, was doing the same thing. And as a more research I do on it, come to find out that on October 4th, 1957, when the Soviet Union launches Sputnik into orbit, it wasn't just a panic within the United States society, our society, but it was also a panic within our military community, because they had beat us to the punch. They were the first to launch a satellite into orbit, and it was pure panic. And our response is to launch Discoverer on December 6th of the same year, which failed, and which gave us more anxiety and more stress that the Soviet Union was far ahead of us in the space race. So our first successful launch comes in January 31st, 1958 with Explorer 1, and we put that in orbit, and it operated. It was launched at let's see, U.S. Army Ballistic Missile Agency. That was part of their complex, and it was its main job was to measure cosmic ray detector designed to measure the radiation environment of the Earth orbit. So Sputnik and also Explorer 1, they pushed the United States into this space race with Soviet Union, and we start working harder to compete. We create NASA in 1959, and the United States Air Force is tasked with working closely with this new organization and also a lot of these private organizations to accelerate our space capabilities. Slide, please. So the DoD itself involved in space operations starting in the late 1950s, but the Air Force was designed as the executive agent for the DoD for space programs in 1961. So launch of Sputnik, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with all the other services work in space, whether it's air defenses, different types of satellites. There was a lot of competition between the services. So it was big for the Air Force actually to be designated in a way as the lead. And the Air Force established major commands, as you see here: Air Force Systems Command, Aerospace Defense Command, Strategic Air Command, and Air Force Communications Command to aid in our what we say our space, our services space efforts. And it for a while worked, but as anybody knows, when you don't have one central organization controlling everything, or at least focusing on space, we get diverted. We tend to lose our focus and focus on every other things, like Air Force Systems Command, not just doing launch and on-orbit control, but had other objectives, other missions too. Strategic Air Command, yes, we're doing DMSP, but everybody knows what SAC was doing. SAC was trying to prevent us from getting into another war with the Soviet Union. So the focus was never really on space. And that hurt us. That essentially hurt us for decades. So it's by we're supporting the United States Air Force is supporting NASA's Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions, and that's great. But as we move into the next stage away from Apollo, the development of the space shuttle actually helped to justify eventually the creation of a space command within the Air Force that focused completely on space. So by the mid-1970s, the Air Force managed the preponderance of space systems for the Defense Department, but it still was organizationally fragmented. Slide, please. So along these organizations, a new space system, the space shuttle, accelerated the debate where primary responsibility for the Air Force space operations could reside. So all these different organizations, like I said, that were fragmented, we need to figure out a way to consolidate everything and make it easier to advance our military space program. So in 1979, with the disestablishment of Aerospace Defense Command, the Air Force started behind the scenes working with a lot of senior leaders to create the first major command for the Air Force in over 30 years. Slide, please. So these gentlemen, a lot of these senior officers sat down and advocated for this new major command to oversee space operations. And it's in 1982 that General James Hardinger, who was started out in the Army, and then he was switched over to the Air Force. He was the NORAD commander, and he advocated for this major command. And he got the support of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And in the beginning of 1982, they actually accelerated the concept of creating a new MAGCOM. And in 1982, it was almost unheard of to go from the beginning phase to the actual establishment activation of a major command in 6 to 8 months. Go on to the next slide, please. So on September 1st, 1982, they activated Space Command at Peterson Air Force Base, and the commander of Air Force Systems Command and also the Air Force Chief of Staff, the Vice Chief of Staff, General O'Malley, were there to help establish this new command. As I mentioned, it was the first new major command in 34 years. Within 2 years of its activation, the United States establishes the United States Space Command, and the Space Command becomes Air Force Space Command within a short time after. So there's no confusion of the Air Force Space Command being a service component, and also the United States Space Command providing the forces for operations to the senior leaders in the Joint Chiefs. So at the command would go on to exist from 1982 to December of 2019. It's pretty interesting being a part of it and watching these changes in the last 13 years, because as many of us know that are involved in military organizations, once we establish something, after a period of time, we get entrenched and we don't like change. Anybody that's involved with military knows we don't like change. Slide, please. So there was been discussions about a Space Force as early as the 1980s. General James Hardinger and the people that he was working with actually discussed the concept of a new service in the 1980s. Like I said, change is not always our friend, and it's not until Desert Storm that we realize how important space assets are. In our community, we refer to Desert Storm as the first space war. We used the Defense Support Program, better known as DSP, and early GPS satellites to detect Scud missile launches against our troops, and also with GPS, having GPS, not even a full constellation of GPS, we use GPS to track troop movements, the Iraqi troop movements, and that helped us to achieve a swift victory. So here we are, 1991, and we're starting to develop our space assets to where we can use them in a conflict. And General Thomas Morman Jr., he is on the record saying that we should promote and talk about in public a lot of our space capabilities, because if the enemy knows what we have, they'll know we're watching. You know, what our DSP satellites first launched in 1970, we launched 23, 3 are still operable. That's 1960s technology that we're still using today, along with our space-based infrared system satellites. Those two track everything that's launched from the Earth, along with GPS, just to name a few of our satellite systems. So like I said, we talked about a new military service for a long time, but it's not until the Rumsfeld Commission called for establishing a separate Space Force in their 2001 report that maybe this could happen. Now, from Rumsfeld's report to the establishment of the Space Force, it still took 18 years. So in 2017, the House of Representatives proposed a Space Corps, and it was really interesting. They wanted it similar to the Marine Corps, but as the ball kept rolling to create the Space Corps, it became evident that maybe we needed to create a new service under the Department of the Air Force. Slide, please. So it's President Trump signs into law the National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2020 that establishes the United States Space Force. So the mission was to provide resilient and affordable space capabilities for the joint force and the nation. That NDA redesignated what was Air Force Space Command into the United States Space Force. And it was electric that day. When President Trump signed that legislation, we went from being a major command in the United States Air Force to a brand new military service. And I can remember people taking off their major command patches and saying, well, we're technically not part of the Air Force anymore. And as somebody mentioned early on in the discussion before we started, recruits into the United States Space Force were onesies, twosies in 2020, and it's grown considerably since then. So the creation of the Space Force brought within it the challenges of pulling together all the United States military's space assets under one service. And it's a daunting task. Just within the last couple of years, we've pulled satellite communications from the Navy and also the Army and brought them into the United States Space Force. Former Navy and Army units became Space Force units, and consolidating our satellite communications network, our systems. And it's been a really interesting adventure to watch a president of the United States create a service. As I mentioned in the beginning, the first one that was created was the Air Force in September of 1947. So we went decades. I think it was over 70 years before another service was created. Before that, as you all know, we did not have a service since the late 1700s. So it's pretty amazing that the president listened to the senior leaders around him that said, hey, we're not giving space enough attention. Even though we created a major command in the United States Air Force for space, we need to do more. Our competitors, our adversaries, Russia and China, we are starting to lose pace with them. And with all the technology that was coming out, like I said, 1991, Desert Storm, General Mormon, talking to the other military branches, saying we need to let people know what our capabilities are. But our systems were very highly classified for a long time. And that makes it difficult to advance technologically. And that hurts us too. When you hear about all the launches from China and Russia, and you're not hearing as much about the United States. Great example. It was 2011, we had the last space shuttle launch. It took almost a decade for the United States to put its own astronauts back into orbit, to launch from the United States soil. So we relied on Russia to launch our astronauts into the ISS. That's not a good way to go. So General Hyten, in about 2013-14, started talking about a partnership with our commercial space companies to work together with them to advance our space program, so we wouldn't be dependent on satellites, on launch systems that were unreliable, very costly, and took a lot of time to actually get into orbit. And Elon Musk is a great contributor to the success of our military space program, and also the creation and success of the United States Space Force. So we in close to 5 years have accomplished something that is virtually unheard of, a new military service that would actually compete along its sister services, and its capabilities are integral to each one of our service members when they're in a conflict. Nowadays, I mean, GPS is so relevant to our everyday life. You can carry a GPS receiver in your hand, a very small handheld receiver, compared to a very large receiver in 1991. So our technology is getting better and better. And Air Force Space Command, which is really interesting, goes from a major command to a service. And within the first year, they said, okay, maybe what we should do is break out the Air Force side, the Space Force side, move it to the Pentagon, and recreate that major command into a field command within the United States Space Force as Space Operations Command. So Space Operations Command, within less than a year of the creation of Space Force, it has its first major command. Now, Air Force Space Command had all these entities of space operations in the beginning, as it was developing launch and satellite systems and ICBMs. It evolved over time, and I was just discussing this with my director the other day. Air Force Space Command had all these different mission sets, and within the last 5 years, with the creation of Space Force, we've created four additional field commands and combatant commands. And so we're evolving quickly, and the message is out there that we can do the job to deter war in space too. So slide, please. So just, overall quick discussion on the space race, launch of Sputnik 1, our space programs, establishment of Space Command, Air Force Space Command, what it took to create a new service, and eventually the creation of the Space Force in December 20th, 2019. So that's all I have.
Great, John. Unfortunately, Space Force is getting a little bit, amongst the established branches, it's still a little bit, they're kind of the newbie, but I'm sure over time it'll become a very established, very critical element of our national defense. In the interest of time, Claudette, are you in a space where you can brief now?
I am ready to go.
Okay, let's go with Claudette just in the interest of time, and then we'll come back for questions. So Claudette, you've got some time. Please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do apologize for having to push things back a little. I was on the road and just had a whole lot of things going on unexpectedly at the same time. Thank you very much. And Tammy, thank you so much for the invitation. I've learned so much just listening to all the other speakers, and I look forward to a wonderful working relationship. Slide, please.
I think
Hello?
Hank needs to bring up the new slides.
And I don't know why my camera is not showing. Okay.
It's all right, Claudette. We're still waiting on your slides. We're not seeing them either yet.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So while we're waiting on the slides, okay, there we go. As you can see, as we stated with the introduction, is the Women Veteran Museum is the first Women Veteran Museum in the state of Pennsylvania. In 2020, we were recognized at the Women's Memorial for what we're doing in the community. We have since added onto our museum military services, and that is because we have our doors have been open, and we have so many military families that are walking in our door asking for services. And so therefore, our intention is never to turn any veterans away, but to make sure that we can coordinate and find the resources that they need to help the veterans and their families. As you look at our slide, you'll see our logo, which is a boots to heal. You'll notice our heel inside the boots, in the military boots. And that is just showing that we as women of the military, how we can transition. We go from boots to heel without breaking a stride and continue on. We service our country, and then we go forward and service our community. Next slide, please. Okay, that is just a picture of our museum. The uniform that you're seeing in the blue, that was of Winifred Panton, whose family came to us with her uniform in a Foot Locker. She served back in the first class of the wave during President Roosevelt, and she was just as someone who kept all her stuff intact. We had her pay receipts, we had her discharge notice, and so all the displays are her uniform, summer uniform, and her winter uniform. Next slide, please. As you can see, we have here a history of women who have served in the military during the different war time, and yet still we're invisible. So what happened with the museum itself in 2019? I attended a Sergeant Major reunion in Texas, and while we were there in the lobby, someone walked up to us and walked up to me and another young lady and asked why we were there, if we were part of the reunion. Our answer was yes. And the gentleman looked at it and he said, "Oh, so you all are the wives." So with that statement, I came back and I was like, this is ridiculous. We are invisible. And if you look at our history going back to the different wars, how many women have served in the military? And one of the growing force of individuals enlisted in the military in today in the 21st century is women. And therefore, we're still not recognized. We're still not being considered a part of the military. And so I won't go through this entire thing, but you can see the numbers that speak for itself of the women who have served and over the time frame, and how many women have actually given their service to our country. In the museum, we have a wall that is incomplete, and it is a wall that say, some gave all, those who gave all. And the wall is, we're unable to complete that wall because when we started doing our research, we found so many women that have given their life, their sacrifices to our country, and their story are not being told. Our museum really not specialized, I should say, but our museum focus on those individuals who have done so much and they're not on our pages. They're not in a book. They have, their family are sharing their stories. And so therefore we open our doors to bring your stories to us, bring your pictures, bring everything. And what we in turn do, we put those on display. And when we have our different groups and our different schools that come in, we share the story of all these amazing women who have contributed to our country. Next slide, please. Here we have a story of the 688, and I know the good doctor will probably know a lot more about the 688. They were activated. They were one of the largest battalion of Black women who was activated back in 1943. It was a total of 855 Black women that were called to active duty, and they were sent over to England due to the increase of males that were being stored. These males were not being sent out to the fields. These men that were fighting were not receiving their mails or their packages. And so therefore, there was this great backlog of mail that was there. And therefore, they activated that 855 Black women group called the 688 Central Postal Battalion. They went over and they were given 6 months to sort out all this mail that were backlogged. They completed it in 3 months. What they did, they actually went through 65,000 pieces of mail per shift in order to have this completed and to make sure that the soldiers on the battlefield were receiving their mail. Their motto was no mail, no morale. So as a way of morale building, they were making sure that these mails received, the soldiers on the battlefield received their mail. At the end of their term or their service to our country, the last of those individuals came home in 1946. They came home with no thank you for your service, no nothing. They were not recognized for their contribution to our armed forces. And one of the reasons for this was, if we look back, it was only until 1948 that we had the Integration Act that was signed. Thinking of considering women as a part of our military and also the integration of Black in our services. So if these women who have served in 1943, 1944, 46, that was way before the time of the 1948 signing. And so therefore, they were not recognized and their service was no benefit or anything. And next slide, please. Okay, this is one of my favorite pictures in our museum. And this is just showing women how we can multitask, which I am doing today, and all the work that we do. But it shows these women serving our country, wearing our uniforms, and at the same time, taking care of their children and being mothers, being the many hats that we wear. And this is why it's so important, our logo, the transition from boots to heel. Next slide, please. I think I'm missing a slide, but we'll go on. Okay. This is just a brief history of what our services, the museum is. Our greatest pleasure is to see groups walking through our doors, and we are sharing the history of the military. Now, our museum, we focus on every branches of service, every individual. In our upcoming event, we have an event coming up October 5th, which will be at the Kalahari Resort. It's called the 50-50 Initiative. And what that is we are inviting 50 veterans. We're more than 50, but we're selecting one veteran from each state to represent that state at our event. And the goal is to give them their flowers now. So if we have 10 women from New York that is there, we have one individual that will represent New York, and all 10 other women will follow behind. It's more like putting out their red carpet to say, thank you for your service, and here is your flowers. Because they have served, and at the same time, we are still invisible. One of the things that we have done at our museum during Memorial Day is we have mannequins. We have a total of 45 mannequins in our museum. Our mannequins in our museum are dressed in different uniforms. Our uniforms going all the way back, as I stated before, 1943. And so we put our mannequins in our Air Force uniform, Navy, Army.
Claudette, I think we lost you. Check whether you muted yourself.
She's stale there. She's not moving. It looks like she's. I think she's frozen. I'm sorry. She's frozen.
Okay. Tammy, if you can text her and maybe let her know. So let's transition to some question and answer. I haven't seen any questions come across the chat. So I guess I'll do one. George, for the forming of the Navy, do you happen to know, was that kind of a contentious issue? Was it, I mean, I'm sure there was questions about how are we going to pay for this? Were there people saying, hey, we don't need a Navy? Do you happen to know the history behind that?
It was contentious because, first off, the British Navy was by far the largest navy
Right.
in the world and the most successful, and so there was a number of people expressed any doubt that there'd be any point in having a Navy because there was no way that we could win.
Right.
And and then also there were issues of cost and practicality. But John Adams, as he was with independence, was relentless in trying to get the naval services established. And people from this area, including Robert Morris, were all equally relentless in trying to find the funds. And they created the Navy, which, while the most important Navy in the American Revolution was the French Navy in the end, because it won the Battle of Yorktown, or made the Battle of Yorktown possible, the U.S. Navy established traditions and also gave a great deal of national pride. When we were losing battles on the land, we were winning. John Paul Jones, for example, was setting tremendous rallying point for the country by winning battles at sea.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Thanks. So sorry, Claudette, you're back with us. You froze for a second, so we decided to get.
No, she can't, I can't hear her.
Next slide.
There you are.
Yeah. Okay, so this is just a slide of our museum and some of the work that we're doing in our museum. Even though we are a woman veteran museum, as I stated before, we open our doors to all veterans and family. And so here in this picture, we have a group of Korean Allied veterans who came into our museum, and they brought with them the signing of HR 366, which allowing Korean Allied veterans to be able to receive benefits from the VA, health benefits from the VA. And so they heard about our museum and they came into our museum to ask us for service. And we're also working alongside with the VA Veterans Affairs in order to help them with their services. But it doesn't take away from the fact that we continue to focus, our highlight is focused on celebrating women veterans and women veterans such as the 6AAA, women veterans such as Andrea Crabtree, who was in 1982 became the Army first female diver, deep sea diver, who was told that this was not a place for her. Her place is she should be home barefoot and pregnant. And that this African-American woman stayed in because she wanted to do nothing more than to dive. She was not allowed to function in that MOS, but later reclassified and was able to retired and was able to do her deep sea diving. She currently located in Virginia, and we are in communication with her, and we are hoping to have her at our 50/50 initiative banquet, which is our 76th celebration of the Integration Act signing. We have also so many other women as the Fly Girls, who were the ones that worked on all our planes and the parachutes. And we lost so many lives from these individuals who were of service to our country, but still they were not recognized as military personnel. So our goal at the museum is to continue to celebrate these women, to tell the stories of those past and those present, and to continue to find as much as we possibly can about women who have served. We know for sure there's over 400 women who have disguised themselves back from the 17th century to serve in the armed forces as men, disguise themselves as men in order to serve. So we are hoping to bring all those individuals to life and bring their stories to the forefront as we continue to build in our museum and highlight women who have served in the military. Any questions for me? I think I see where someone stated where is the museum located. It is located in Mount Pocono. It is in Monroe County, and I will go ahead and put our address in the chat. Earlier, I put our website and our email in the chat, but I'll go ahead and do that again. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Claudette. That was awesome. And Claudette and I were chatting before everybody came on. I guess I happened to be up in that neck of the woods and was only a couple miles from the museum and didn't even know it. So I hope to make it up there at some point. Does anybody have any? So we got, where's the museum located? We've got that. I don't necessarily have a question. I have an observation. So George, you had a picture of Major General Lejeune, and the picture you put up there had a big Army 2nd Infantry Division patch, and that caught my eye. I was like, "What's that for?" Well, I learned that Major General Lejeune was a commander of a Marine brigade in the 2nd Infantry Division, and then was tapped to be the commander of the Army 2nd Infantry Division. So a Marine Major General in charge of an Army division. And my viewpoint is kind of sacrilegious, but I understand why that happened. So just a piece of trivia there. So
Thank you for that information.
any other questions for anybody on the panel?
I don't have a question. This is Shanda Taylor Boyd. I just wanted to thank our professor, George, for his introductory remarks, especially when he mentioned the Tuskegee Airmen and the role that these courageous men and women played, and how they truly were not acknowledged upon their return. But they began to make things right. I believe it was in 2007 when they received a Medal of Honor. So that really means a great deal, especially since I'm a member of the Greater Philadelphia chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen. And I did have the pleasure of hearing George speak at the Tuskegee Airmen Scholarship Gala. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for all the presentations. They were extremely informative, and I look forward to delving more deeply into all of this and making my contribution to our upcoming 250th celebration and anniversary. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of books of Dr. Kodosky's that I'm looking forward to reading. I'm very curious about the Yaden Pool, and that how that came about, and kind of the ability of that community to say, well, you know what, we're going to take care of it ourselves. Go ahead, Dr. Kodosky.
I just yesterday, there's a website called Picturing Black History. It's out of Ohio State University. And just yesterday, I published an article there looking at, it's called Outside the Frame, because if you look at representation historically of Black military history, in many cases, it's literally whited out. And so you have many iconic photographs and paintings and all the rest where there are just no Black people. Mm-hmm. You know, the Battle of New Orleans comes to mind, where half of Jackson's forces were of color, and the most famous there are no Black people in the paintings. So
right. No, that's why I love gatherings like this, because how else are you going to find out things like that and get that kind of perspective? John, I had a quick question for you, and maybe it's not a quick answer, but
no, go ahead.
The formation of Space Force, was there? I'm sure it was contentious because, hey, we gotta have to develop this new branch of the military. Was there a lot of stuff going on in the background that like us as casual observers would not see? I mean, I have to think there was a ton of work going on.
There was a lot of work, and it started with the reestablishment in the United States Space Command in 2019. As mentioned before, there were a lot of turf battles. There's always been turf battles of people having the mission and wanting to hold on to it. At one time, Air Force Space Command had cyber, and cyber is now with Air Combat Command. So it's unbelievable. And yet the Space Force actually has components of cyber within the service. So there were a lot of issues with, no disrespect, the Army and the Navy not wanting to give up their portions of their space mission.
Right.
And our former Commander General Whiting, who's now the U.S. Space Command commander, was like, no, we need to bring it under one roof. And with the integration of that mission under one roof, it makes us easier to operate.
Right.
And what we've been looking at, and just a mention of it, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, all the services had components of a space mission, and they were disconnected.
Right.
And as a result,
Imagine that.
so there was a lot of fighting. We joke. General John Hyten, former Joint Chiefs Vice Chair, we know a little bit about what he was doing, but he had to have more influence. General John J. Raymond. I've met them numerous times, and they speak the space lingo, and they're really good people that took the time to explain the mission to everyone else and to get the support. And give somebody like Harry Truman a lot of credit for allowing, establishing the United States Space Force in 1947. I give President Trump major kudos for creating the United States Space Force, despite all attempts in previous decades where, there was a call to create this service, and everybody said, no, we're not going to give it up. We're not going to give up this mission. We don't need a space service because it doesn't. And that's how the concept of the Space Corps first came up. But like I said, we only know even as Space Force historians, we only know bits and pieces of what the discussions that were going on. There had to have been a lot of backdoor discussions of, look, you need to give this up. You can't it's funny. We have the cyber mission, and cyber mission is integral to the space mission because our operators that are working on DSP or the SBIRS satellites can't function properly without having an element of cyber in their mission to make sure that their technology works flawlessly.
Right.
And it's amazing that it took so long for somebody to finally say, okay, we're not doing our due diligence by having Navstar over in the Navy. Let's bring it under one service, and
right.
It's a lot more effective. Speaking with the commanders of those units, or excuse me, the space deltas, they're just unbelievably proud of all the people that the inter-service military members that contribute to the fight. And that's not just people in uniform, that's civilians too, and contractors. And that's something that's really interesting about the Space Force, is that it's not just active duty, it's also civilians. And there's
right.
more civilians in the Space Force than there are military.
Right.
So like I said, I commend President Trump on creating this new service, because I could only imagine people saying, don't
right.
do it. Don't
right.
upset the apple cart.
Yep.
And, he listened to the right people, and now our adversaries know on a day-to-day basis what our capabilities are.
Yep. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Any last call for questions? We're at 10:58. Anything else?
This is not a question. This is just a comment. And first of all, I want to just apologize because I think I referred to Dr. Kodosky as George, but I want to make a point to George regarding the celebration of our Marine Corps and our United States Navy birthday celebrations. I think it is exceptionally forward thinking to incorporate acknowledging all the branches of the military, especially with the reunion for the veterans and the incorporation of the veteran service organizations and the opportunity to increase or make membership opportunities available. I just want to say kudos to you, because this is one way to truly bring our nation's men and women who have served and who are still serving together, and also the foresight to include those who are attending the academies and also the ROTC cadets. So this is really truly, it's just amazing, and I'm excited to be a part of this. And I also wanted to mention to Claudette, thank you so much for all your hard work and helping us to realize, even though we're trying to make it so that women veterans and the women who are serving are voiceless and invisible no more, we have a very long way to go. So continue to march. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very well said, Shonda. And on behalf of DVVC, we will stay in touch with George about how we can integrate DVVC and its member organizations into the celebration and how we can support that. So we don't have that many people left. We have our guest speakers and a couple others. So October is our strategy planning meeting. We've shifted that from January, but we'll put that out in a message. So Dr. Kodosky, thank you so much. George, Leone, thank you very much. Claudette Williams, thank you so much. And I know that John Lacomia had to leave. This was super informative. I love these kind of things because I learn something every time. So thank you very much, everybody. I look forward to getting some of the books, and please, I also, Dr. Kodosky, the Encyclopedia of Greater Philadelphia, I'm going to look that up and see if there's some role that we have in there. So thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Leadership, stick around if you would. Guests, have a great weekend. Thank you. Have a great summer.